Simmons type of guy, where when Ben Simmons went to LSU, you knew he was there for one reason and one reason only. He was there to play basketball and move on to the NBA. And again, this is something that I've said to you multiple times, and whenever we talk about it on the basketball podcast, whenever we talk about one and dones and everything like that, this is going to come up. This is on the NBA and the NCAA for how they work things right now. You need to let these guys go straight out of high school. It's just that simple, because these guys, they don't want to be there. It's making the product worse. And, I mean, in all honesty, it is driving some of these coaches just crazy, the way that things are right now.
That's a whole other podcast we can do in the summer. My opinion on that situation is this. You either can go from high school to the NBA, and that's okay. But if you go to college, 3 years like in football, I know football you can't go from high school to the NFL, but their bodies at 18 aren't ready to go to the NFL. Your body can be 18 to go to the NBA. Zion Williamson's body was ready at 18 to produce at the NBA level. But in college, it makes both products better. You get a better version of the college product, and then when those guys go to the NBA, they are ready for the pro level of basketball, and it'll make the NBA product better.
I would say 2 years, but we'll do it we'll talk about it in the offseason, because I think that then you're going to start getting into the, having to pay guys if you're going to require them to stay a certain amount of time, whatever. So that's a whole nother topic. But the main thing that this is focused on is the fact that Hubert Davis is going to look for different types of guys. Now, that's the thing. You may have to temper your expectations for this team when they bring in some of these guys. No longer are you going to have a ton of these guys like we've had the past couple of years, where in year one they could come in and have a major impact. Some of these guys that he will be recruiting, they will take time to develop, but they are going to be guys that are going to be willing to put in the work and willing to climb the depth chart, very similar to Luke May. We remember the first time that we saw Luke May in a game, we said, what in the hell is this guy doing in a basketball game right now in his significant moment? Fast forward a couple years later, he hits one of the biggest shots in Carolina history, and then as a senior, coming into the season, was arguably the team's best player. Those are the types of guys that I think Hubert Davis is going to look at. And to be really honest with you, with the lack of success that we've seen from them recruiting some of these big-name guys, these one-and-done guys over the past couple of years, I'm not really against it.
I've said all along I'm not against getting older, staying older, recruiting high-end 4-star, 5-star players that you know are going to be there for a couple years and develop. Now, look, this ain't going to be deemed successful unless he wins. And I do think as we're transitioning in this era, we need to understand that we're probably not going to win the ACC next season, probably not going to make the Final Four. So what is the most important for him to do to set himself up and the program up for success? I think it starts with the staff. I think if he gets the right staff in place, like we've seen with Mac Brown on the football side of things,
it's crucial.
It makes this adjustment easier, because he's going to have to learn as he goes. He's never been a head coach at the Power 5 level, let alone at a job as prestigious at North Carolina, let alone at a job in a conference like the ACC, which we all expect to bounce back next season after a rather down year this past year. And I you look at some of these great coaches that are coming from the NBA ranks or with no college basketball experience, they have elite staffs around them.
I mean, it's no doubt it's going to be important. I think that in recent years, just because of the fact that this is now a 365, 366, depending on the year, day-a-year job, you've got to have a good staff around you. I mean, even Roy Williams, I think that's one of the more underrated things. Like, we are huge Roy guys. We have always been huge Roy guys. We're extremely supportive of him and what he did in his time at Carolina. the fact of the matter is, Roy Williams had some amazing staffs that he put around himself, which is great on him. A lot of those hires, he was the one that went and recommended them. It's also a great job of Bubba Cunningham, of Dick Bedore before him, making sure that those guys were paid the way they needed to be able to stay on those staffs and help Roy Williams. You've got to have, look at the fact Joe Holliday was a tremendous assistant coach. Is he in the assistant coaches Hall of Fame? Because we know Steve Robinson is.
He's gotta be.
I'm assuming he's probably in there as well. Roy Williams has had some amazing staffs around him. And as you mentioned, on the football side of things, I think that was one of the things we noticed that about the football team with Larry Fedora. They weren't able to keep staff members around. That was what was ultimately the start of the downfall to their success. You've seen it with Mac Brown coming in. The football program has had their same staff together for 3 years now, only losing one guy, and he went to Alabama. That was a step up. That made sense. That team has had so much more success because of that. That's the key when it comes to putting this staff together. One, you want to find guys that are Carolina guys. He wants to find, the guys from the Smith, Guthridge, and Williams era. Makes a lot of sense. But the biggest thing is also, you want guys that are not only going to come in and be there to help you coach for a few years. You want guys that are looking at that and saying, look, I want to be here for the long run. You've got, trust me, there are going to be guys on your staff very similar to what we saw with Roy, where they will potentially leave for head coaching jobs. And that's fine. You want some of your guys to go on and have that type of success. But you also want to have that Steve Robinson type that's going to stick by you and is looking at it as, look, this is where I want to be. I want to be an assistant coach. I want to be on your bench. You've got to be able to find those guys. I think he will. He may already have that guy in Brad Frederick on his bench, or potentially Steve Robinson returning. We just don't know. I think that's going to be the key is, can you balance that staff out right to where you bring in some guys that have maybe some head coaching experience that can help you through what's going to be a little bit of a bumpy start probably for him because he is a first-time head coach at the D1 level. This isn't going to be the JV team anymore. And you also have those guys that are going to be there for a long time and are going to grow with you. That was one of the things that, when we look at Steve Robinson, that's what Steve Robinson did with Roy Williams. He was with him from the beginning and grew with him. To me, that guy on the staff is probably Sean May that's going to grow with them. So if you can find those right set of guys, you're going to be set up for success. I really think so.
Speaking of success, the last thing we'll touch on before we do get out of here on the very first edition of the Four Corners podcast is, what does he have to do to deem this successful? So before Roy Williams got the job in 2003, in the previous 65 years, Carolina won 3 national championships. Not bad. College basketball is arguably the hardest championship to win because you got to win now 6 one-and-done elimination games. No other sport you have to do that in the United States. Roy Williams comes in, and in the first 14 years, won 3 national championships. So he duplicated the same amount of success in about the fourth amount of time between Dean Smith or between Frank McGuire, Dean Smith, Bill Guthridge, and Matt Doherty. I mentioned that, as much as taking care of the family is a big part of this job, ultimately you've got to win. You got to do both. You got to win, and you got to keep the family together. So we're hoping this is a 15, 20-year decision here, that he's going to be here for the long haul. For that to be the case, what does success look like under Hubert Davis?
It's really tough because I feel like most people are going to say multiple national championships. I don't know if that's where I'm at, though, because living up to the legacy of those two guys is going to be extremely difficult. And I said this when we did the podcast after he got hired. I felt like when you looked at this hire, you felt like this was a safer hire than going with a guy like Wes Miller, possibly even going with a guy that could be on his staff in King Rice. I think this is one where you've got a pretty high floor as to the success of Hubert Davis, where I don't think you're ever going to be awful under Hubert Davis. But I don't know how high the ceiling is for him. Do I think he could bring home a national championship? Yes. But I will say this. I would say in order for him to be deemed successful, I would say if he could get to 3 or 4 Final Fours and maybe win a national championship, you would consider that successful. But I don't know. Most Carolina fans probably wouldn't consider that successful because of just how successful the program as a whole has been. I think the expectations are extremely high, but that is so much to live up to because you're talking about 2 of the greatest head coaches in college basketball history, probably 2 of the 4 greatest head coaches in college basketball history that you are having to try to replicate the type of success that they had. I mean, to me, like I said, if he can get to those to 3 or 4 Final Fours and get a championship out of it, I would consider it successful.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned all their high expectations. That's the job. This is the best job in college basketball. I would argue it's probably a top 3 job in college athletics right there with Notre Dame, Alabama, Ohio State football. This is better than 2/3 of the jobs in the NBA. You've got to win here, and you've got to win big. You've got the resources to win big, but it's also really hard to win national championships. So I'm not saying he has to win a national title to deem this successful.
Well, that's the other thing.
But he's got to be like Bill Guthridge. Bill Guthridge made 2 Final Fours in 3 years. That move to quit as late as he did to make Bill Guthridge the head coach was successful. Had that team not made the Final Four in 97, 98, and then 2000 never happens, you're probably looking at 3 years where you lost. And then that becomes 6 years because you didn't really accomplish anything under Matt Doherty. So I don't know if he has to necessarily win the national championship, and I hope he's here 15 to 20 years. That's the goal. That's what we're hoping for. But he's at least got to get to the Final Four a handful of times.
Right. That's where I'm at.
To deem this successful.
Well, the biggest thing that's different as well is when you look back at when Dean Smith was here, and even to a certain extent, I think for Roy Williams' first 2 national championships, there was nowhere near as much parity in college basketball as there is now. I mean, you're talking about going into this tournament, there were multiple people throughout the country that legitimately thought Loyola of Chicago as an 8 seed was going to make the Final Four. And when they beat Illinois, it was pretty much expected that they were going to the Final Four. You're talking about a UCLA team that came out of the first 4 to make the Final Four. The parity in the sport is as great as it has ever been.
That's what makes college basketball as great as it is.
But it also makes it, especially for the blue bloods like Carolina is, the most difficult it has been to win a national championship. Because it used to be when you got into the tournament, there were 64 other teams in there. To be honest with you, how many of them had a legitimate chance to make a run and win a national championship? Maybe 25? Now, I mean, you look, there are legitimately probably 40-plus teams when you enter the tournament that you can look at and say, hey, if that team made a run, I wouldn't be surprised at all. That's the point that you've gotten to in college basketball. So, I mean, look, for the general college basketball fans that we are, that's great. As guys that follow and cover Carolina, that means that it's not as likely as it was in the past that you're going to be able to string together multiple years of success. That's why when you look back on what Roy Williams did from 2016 to 2019, it is unbelievable the amount of success.
3 number 1 seeds and a 2 seed.
I mean, that's crazy. That is almost unheard of now in college basketball because, I mean, look at Duke over the last couple of years. Kentucky. I mean, it is really hard to be that successful consecutive years in a row now with the way that college basketball is. So that's the thing that Hubert Davis is going to have to navigate. But I do think that, again, he's a guy that I think is ready to take on the expectations. He doesn't seem like a guy that's scared of the expectations. And I think that being an assistant, being around that, gives him a chance to succeed. Now, that's not saying I think Wes Miller would be able to handle those expectations too. You got to think, both times that he's been in the NCAA tournament, his teams have had the expectations that they were going to come in and upset opponents. They didn't pull the upset either time, but they gave both of the teams that they played against really tough games. So, I mean, that's the thing is I think there were a couple of guys in the Carolina family that were ready for these expectations, but I think Hubert Davis is the guy that feels like he might be the most ready for these expectations right now.
We're going to find out. It's a mere 7